Imagine for a moment that the fabric of reality isn't what we think it is. That the solid world around you, the chair you're sitting on, the room you're in, even the device you're holding, is less like a fixed structure and more like a shimmering field of possibilities waiting to be chosen. That's not a line from a spiritual book. That's a line straight out of quantum physics. And this is where the story begins, at the meeting point between science and spirituality, where two worlds that were once considered opposites start to speak the same language. For centuries, spirituality spoke of unseen forces, energy, consciousness, intention, vibration. Quantum physics, on the other hand, built its reputation on measurement, equations, and cold, hard evidence. But something remarkable happens when you start listening closely to both. You begin to realize they're describing the same reality, just using different words. One paints the picture with metaphor and intuition, the other with math and probabilities, but the canvas is the same reality itself. This is not a tale about vague mystical ideas. It's about what happens when modern science begins to validate experiences humans have whispered about for millennia. Think of the monk meditating in a silent temple, sensing the interconnectedness of all things. Then picture a physicist staring at a chalkboard filled with equations about quantum entanglement, describing how two particles can be connected across vast distances, moving in harmony as if they were one. These two people may never meet, but they are describing the same phenomenon, and this is where it gets fascinating. At the heart of quantum physics lies a shocking idea: reality doesn't truly exist in a fixed form until it's observed. This is not just theory. It's what countless experiments have shown. The act of observation doesn't just reveal reality, it shapes it. And if observation shapes reality, then what does consciousness really mean? Is consciousness just a passenger inside the universe, or is it the driver? Spiritual traditions have always insisted that consciousness comes first, that the world arises from awareness, not the other way around. Quantum physics, with its strange experiments like the double-slit test, seems to whisper something similar. When scientists fire particles through two slits, they act like waves, spreading out and interfering with themselves until they are measured. The moment they're observed, they snap into a single location, as if reality itself is waiting for someone to look before deciding what to be. This is where the old boundaries between science and spirituality start to dissolve. For centuries, humanity built walls between these two domains, one ruled by faith and inner knowing, the other by logic and external proof. But as quantum science advances, those walls are beginning to crack. The more we understand about the subatomic world, the more it looks like what mystics have been describing all along: a reality that responds to consciousness, where everything is connected in ways we can barely comprehend. Now imagine what that means for your everyday life. If reality isn't fixed until observed, then your perception, your awareness, your attention isn't just passive, it's creative. This isn't a metaphorical idea. In the quantum world, the observer doesn't simply watch reality unfold, the observer participates in creating it. It's as if the universe is an instrument, and consciousness is the hand that plays the music. But here's where most people stop short. They think this means, whatever I think, happens. That's not quite it. Quantum physics doesn't bend to every random thought or passing desire. It responds to deep patterns, to energy, coherence, and intention. Spirituality has long taught something similar, that true transformation isn't about wishing, it's about aligning your inner state with a higher level of awareness. This is why monks can sit in stillness for hours and speak of feeling the entire universe breathing with them. Why people in deep meditative states report sensations of expansion, of time dissolving, of connection to something infinite. These aren't hallucinations. They are glimpses into the quantum fabric of reality, where separation is an illusion and everything is interwoven in an invisible web. When spiritual teachers talk about oneness, they are pointing to what quantum physicists describe as non-locality. Non-locality is the idea that particles can be correlated beyond space and time, meaning one particle here can instantaneously affect another particle across the universe. It's as if reality has no real boundaries, only the ones we imagine. And if that's true, then perhaps consciousness itself is not trapped inside your skull. Perhaps it's part of something much larger, a field of awareness that exists everywhere, all the time. That would explain why spiritual experiences often involve feelings of merging with something greater. It would also explain why prayer, meditation, or focused intention sometimes appear to influence the world in ways science can't fully explain. Until now, the deeper quantum physicists go, the more they find that the universe is not a machine but a mystery. A dance of probabilities, not certainties. And in that dance, consciousness plays a lead role. We used to think the universe was like a giant clock, ticking along without us. Now we are beginning to realize it may be more like a symphony, and we are part of the orchestra. Of course, skeptics will say, that's just woo-woo nonsense, and it's good to question everything. But here's the thing, the very equations and experiments that built modern physics point to a world stranger than any mystical story. They show us that at its core, reality is fluid, responsive, and interconnected, not because we want it to be, but because that's what the data says. This is why more and more scientists are starting to talk about consciousness, not as a byproduct of the brain, but as a fundamental part of the universe. A hidden ingredient woven into the fabric of existence. The shift isn't about abandoning science, it's about expanding it, merging what the ancients intuited with what the lab reveals. And so, as we step deeper into this journey, the question isn't whether spirituality and quantum physics are at odds. The question is what happens when they finally meet. When the equations of physics start to echo the language of the mystics. What happens when we stop seeing consciousness as something separate and start recognizing it as the very force that gives rise to the world? This is not a distant idea for scientists in white coats or monks on mountaintops. It's about you. It's about the way your thoughts, your awareness, your state of being might be shaping reality right now, in ways you've never fully understood. The meeting point between quantum physics and spirituality isn't just out there in the cosmos. It's happening inside you in every moment, with every thought and every breath. And this is where our story truly begins. Because to understand what really happens when these two worlds meet, we must go deeper, beyond the experiments, beyond the mantras, into the heart of what consciousness truly is. When quantum physics first emerged in the early 20th century, it wasn't just a new chapter in science. It was a revolution. It shook the foundations of everything humanity believed about reality. Imagine being a physicist at that time, trained to think of the universe as predictable, mechanical, and absolute. Then, suddenly, you're confronted with experiments showing that particles don't behave like tiny billiard balls, but like waves of infinite possibilities. The universe, once thought to be a cosmic machine, begins to look more like a dream. It was unsettling. Many scientists resisted it at first. How could something so precise as mathematics reveal a world that's so uncertain? How could a particle be in multiple places at once until it's observed? Yet, the experiments kept proving it over and over again. The deeper physicists looked, the less solid the world became. It wasn't just strange, it was profoundly spiritual. Meanwhile, spiritual traditions across the world were whispering something humanity had long dismissed. They said the physical world is not the ultimate reality. It's a reflection, a projection, a field shaped by consciousness itself. What quantum physics did was to give that ancient whisper a modern voice. It didn't just say reality is flexible, it showed us how. Consider the phenomenon of quantum superposition. It says that a particle can exist in multiple states simultaneously until observed. Now, step outside the lab for a moment and think about your own life. How many possibilities surround you at this very second? Infinite versions of tomorrow, infinite outcomes, all existing in potential. But it's your focus, your awareness, your decisions that collapse one of those possibilities into your experienced reality. Spirituality has long said, where attention goes, energy flows. Quantum physics says, where observation occurs, reality collapses into form. Two languages, one truth. But there's something even more breathtaking: quantum entanglement. When two particles interact, they become linked in such a way that the state of one instantly affects the other, no matter the distance. This isn't a theory anymore. It's been tested repeatedly. It defies our ordinary understanding of space and time. In spiritual language, this is interconnectedness, the unity of all things. It means you are not a separate island floating through an indifferent universe. You are part of a vast, invisible web where every thought, every action, every vibration echoes through the whole. Imagine this web as a cosmic ocean. Every ripple you make through your consciousness moves through it, touching everything else. When you pray, meditate, love, hate, or hope, you're not doing it in a vacuum. You're sending out quantum ripples that merge with the infinite sea of possibilities. And that is why spiritual masters have always insisted that your inner state matters. Modern science is slowly catching up. Neuroscientists studying meditation find that people who train their minds can influence their bodies, their emotions, even their perception of pain. Physicists looking at coherence find that synchronized brain and heart rhythms create measurable changes in electromagnetic fields around the body. This isn't pseudoscience. It's data. Data that points to something we've always felt deep down: consciousness is powerful. And yet, here's the paradox: the more powerful consciousness is, the more responsibility it demands. Spirituality teaches that awareness is not just about manifesting desires. It's about aligning with the flow of the universe, not fighting against it. Quantum physics seems to echo this with its probabilistic nature. Reality doesn't bend to ego, it responds to coherence, alignment, and intention. Think of it like tuning a radio. The universe is broadcasting infinite frequencies. Your consciousness is the tuner. Most people go through life unaware they're holding the dial. Their minds are full of static, fears, doubts, distractions, and so the signal they receive is chaotic. But those who learn to quiet the noise, to align their inner state, can tune into frequencies of clarity, creativity, abundance, and insight. This isn't magic, it's resonance. In laboratories, experiments show that even the smallest change in the observer's interaction can influence quantum systems. In ancient temples, sages say that a single moment of true presence can change a life. These aren't separate stories. They're reflections of the same reality through different lenses. But here's where the real transformation begins. Once you understand that consciousness isn't just inside you but connected to everything, your sense of self begins to expand. You stop seeing yourself as a powerless observer of life. You begin to recognize yourself as a participant, a co-creator. Spirituality calls this awakening. Quantum physics, though it may use colder words, hints at the same thing: the universe is participatory. Reality doesn't exist fully without you. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff overlooking a vast, shimmering ocean of possibility. Every breath, every thought, every emotion is like a stone cast into the water. Most people never realize how many waves they're creating. They think life happens to them, not through them. But when you begin to understand this dance, when you realize that consciousness is not passive, everything changes. And yet, this is not about control. The universe is not your personal vending machine. It's a living field of infinite intelligence. Spiritual traditions speak of surrender, not as giving up, but as aligning with a higher order. Quantum physics reveals that certainty is an illusion. The only constant is potential. When you bring awareness into that space, you don't dictate the outcome, you collaborate with it. This is why people who enter deep states of meditation often speak of feeling guided. It's why scientists describe quantum events not as chaotic, but as probabilistic, structured chaos with an underlying intelligence. It's not randomness, it's a kind of cosmic flexibility. A dance between the observer and the observed, between you and the field. And this dance doesn't just happen in scientific laboratories or spiritual retreats. It happens every day in your relationships, your work, your health, your dreams. When your mind is cluttered with fear, it tunes into fearful frequencies. When it's clear, coherent, and connected, it accesses deeper layers of reality. And that's when synchronicities begin to appear, those coincidences that feel too precise to be random. In spiritual language, it's alignment. In quantum terms, it's resonance and entanglement at work. This is the quiet revolution taking place in human consciousness. For centuries, we've lived as if the world, out there, is separate from the mind, in here. But quantum physics is gently pulling that illusion apart. It's showing us that the line between inner and outer is blurry, perhaps non-existent. What you hold inside isn't just personal. It's part of the collective field that shapes reality itself. And so, the more conscious you become of your inner world, the more power you hold to shape the outer. That's why spiritual practices like mindfulness, breathwork, and deep contemplation aren't just rituals. They're technologies, ancient technologies designed to fine-tune the observer. When you change the observer, you change the observation. And when the observation changes, reality shifts. This is not wishful thinking. It's the frontier of understanding what it truly means to be human in a quantum universe. A being not isolated, but entangled. Not powerless, but profoundly influential. A consciousness capable of collapsing possibilities into realities. And this leads us to the real question: if reality responds to consciousness, what happens when humanity wakes up together? When billions of observers align, not in fear or division, but in awareness and intention? What happens when spiritual awakening meets scientific understanding? That's not just a personal shift, that's a planetary one. We are standing at the threshold of that possibility. And what happens next depends on how we choose to see, to observe, to awaken. What happens when humanity begins to awaken to the idea that consciousness is not just a flickering light inside our heads, but part of the very foundation of the universe? Everything changes, because then the story of life stops being one of random accidents and blind forces, and becomes a story of participation, of co-creation, of responsibility. For most of human history, we've been told that the universe is indifferent, that we are small creatures floating on a pale blue dot, orbiting a star that doesn't even know we exist. That everything is governed by fixed laws, and consciousness is just a side effect of neurons firing. But when quantum physics meets spirituality, that narrative begins to unravel. It's not that the laws of nature vanish. They expand. They reveal a universe far more dynamic, intelligent, and alive than we ever imagined. Take the simple act of observation. In quantum physics, it's not just looking, it's participation. When we observe a system, we don't merely reveal what's there, we help determine it. That means reality is not a static backdrop, it's a living canvas, responding to the brush of awareness. Spirituality has always said this in different words, that life mirrors the state of your inner world. Now, science is catching up. This isn't about turning physics into religion or mysticism into equations. It's about realizing that there are two doors leading into the same room. The physicist with their equations and the mystic with their silence are both explorers of the same mystery, consciousness. And when their discoveries overlap, something extraordinary happens. Reality itself starts to look different. The mystics have said for millennia, as within, so without. Quantum science shows us that the observer and the observed are inseparable. The spiritual masters teach, you are not separate from the universe. Quantum entanglement says, nothing is truly independent. Different words, same truth. Once you let this sink in, the way you move through the world begins to shift. You realize that every thought, every emotion, every intention isn't just private. It echoes through the web of existence. This isn't a reason to fear your thoughts. It's an invitation to become aware of them. Because awareness is power. And the more aware you are, the more consciously you shape the field around you. But this isn't only about individuals. Imagine an entire species waking up to this truth. Imagine billions of people realizing that what they focus on, feel, and believe isn't meaningless background noise but active participation in a shared reality. That kind of awakening would be revolutionary, because it would shift humanity from a mindset of separation to one of unity. We already see glimpses of it. When large groups meditate together, measurable changes occur, not just in their brains, but in their surroundings. Cities grow calmer, violence decreases, people feel a subtle shift in the air. Science doesn't fully understand why, but the data is undeniable. Something happens when consciousness aligns. Spirituality calls it collective intention. Quantum science might call it coherence in the field. This is where the two domains, physics and spirituality, stop being rivals and start being allies. Science gives us tools to measure and understand. Spirituality gives us language to feel and experience. Together, they offer a map to navigate a living, conscious universe. But awakening to this truth isn't always easy. It demands that we let go of old stories. The story that says we are separate. The story that says we are powerless. The story that says reality is fixed and unchangeable. Those stories have comforted humanity for a long time, because they allowed us to surrender responsibility. But they also kept us asleep. When you begin to see yourself not as a bystander but as a participant in reality, the weight of that realization can feel overwhelming at first. But then, slowly, something shifts. You start noticing subtle patterns. Synchronicities that feel too perfect to be accidents. Doors that open when you're aligned. People appearing at just the right moment. Insights flowing out of nowhere. It's not coincidence. It's the field responding. This is what mystics have described for centuries as the universe speaking to you. Not in words but in patterns, signals, alignments. Quantum physics doesn't call it speaking, but it does acknowledge that reality is fundamentally interactive. That nothing happens in isolation. Every event, every possibility, is entangled with everything else. This leads to one of the most profound questions a human being can ask. If consciousness is fundamental, then what are we really? Are we minds trapped in bodies, or are we something larger temporarily wearing a human form? Spirituality answers you are consciousness itself, having a human experience. Quantum physics doesn't answer directly, but it points toward the same mystery. If reality emerges through observation, then consciousness is not a product of matter. It may be the source of it. If that's true, then perhaps what we call spiritual awakening is simply remembering who we are, not separate, but infinite. Not powerless, but deeply connected to the fabric of existence. This isn't about ego. In fact, true awakening dissolves ego. It's about merging into the awareness that has always been here, behind every thought, every breath, every star in the sky. And this understanding isn't something reserved for scientists or mystics. It's for everyone. Every human being has the capacity to experience this, not through belief, but through direct awareness. When you quiet your mind, when you become present, you begin to feel it. The field isn't somewhere out there. It's here in this moment. It always has been. That's why ancient spiritual traditions placed so much emphasis on stillness. In stillness, the noise of the mind fades, and the deeper reality begins to reveal itself. Quantum physics, for all its complexity, is pointing toward the same direction, that reality is not what it seems on the surface. That the physical world is just the tip of an iceberg floating in an invisible ocean of possibility. And here's the most empowering part: once you glimpse this truth, you can't unsee it. You begin to live differently. You become more intentional with your thoughts. You stop seeing yourself as small. You start understanding that the universe is not a distant, cold mechanism. It's a living field, and you are part of it. Your focus becomes sacred. Your awareness becomes a force. Your life begins to align with deeper patterns that were always there, waiting for you to notice. And slowly, a new kind of intelligence begins to guide you, not from outside, but from the infinite consciousness within. This is the real meeting point between quantum physics and spirituality. It's not about equations or scriptures. It's about the lived experience of being an aware, awake participant in the unfolding of reality. Science can describe it. Spirituality can feel it. But ultimately, it's something you become. The mystics call it awakening. Physicists might call it a shift in the observer. But whatever the language, the truth remains. Consciousness and reality are intertwined. And when you understand that, the way you live your life will never be the same. So, what really happens when quantum physics meets spirituality? The walls between science and spirit begin to fall. The illusion of separation begins to dissolve. Humanity begins to remember its place, not beneath the stars but among them. Not as outsiders in the universe, but as expressions of it. We realize that the same field that shapes galaxies flows through us. That the same intelligence that moves the planets listens to the quiet rhythm of our hearts. And in that realization, something ancient awakens. The understanding that reality isn't happening to us, it's happening through us. This is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new one. A story where science and spirituality walk side by side. A story where consciousness is recognized as the foundation, not the afterthought. A story where you, me, and everyone else realize that we are far more powerful, more connected, and more infinite than we ever dared to believe. The next chapter isn't written yet. It will be shaped by how we choose to observe, to awaken, to live. Because in a quantum universe, the observer isn't just part of the story. The observer is the story. And that observer is you.